You awaken slowly, softly, beneath a canopy of pale cotton. The air is warm and heavy with the perfume of night jasmine, its scent floating lazily through the slatted windows. A peacock calls somewhere in the distance, not urgently, but like a drowsy poet trying to remember a rhyme from a dream. You're not in battle, not in a throne room. You're in a palace garden, somewhere in the middle of ancient India, surrounded by carved sandstone, low cushions, and the gentle gurgle of a lotus pond. It is the 3rd century BCE, and history is just beginning to change its rhythm. Beside you lies a scroll, a poem, carefully inked, the letters slanted like they're relaxing mid-stanza. And there, under the shade of a flowering gulmohar tree, sits a man in simple robes. He is humming, absent-mindedly, and holding a worn palm leaf manuscript. He does not look like an emperor. Not today. But he is. You are in the company of Emperor Ashoka, once a conqueror, now a philosopher, a poet, and perhaps one of the most peculiar footnotes in imperial history. This is the man who once led brutal campaigns across the Indian subcontinent, whose armies thundered across rivers and deserts and left behind cities trembling in dust. And then, quite suddenly, he stopped. Not because he ran out of soldiers, not because the empire collapsed, but because one day he looked at a battlefield and couldn't unsee what he saw. He gave up war, embraced Buddhism, and instead of carving victory into stone, he began carving words of peace. You probably won't make it through this day without scribbling a haiku on a napkin. So breathe in, relax, let your shoulders drop and your thoughts wander. And before we drift any deeper into this gently radical tale, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting us know where in the world you're listening from, and whether you've ever tried to rhyme in Sanskrit. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. The boy who wasn't supposed to rule. The story, like most ancient things, begins in a swirl of uncertainty. Ashoka, long before he was a name etched into edicts or whispered in temple courtyards, was simply a prince. Not the favorite, not the heir, just one of several sons of Bindusara, the Mauryan emperor, whose own throne had been carved from war and clever alliances. Ashoka's name means without sorrow, an ironic foreshadowing, perhaps, considering how much of his youth would be shaped by proving himself in blood. But not yet. You sit now beneath the heavy shadows of a classroom in the palace, if you can call it that. It's more of a breezy courtyard filled with sharp-eyed tutors and scrolls inked in Pali and Sanskrit. A young Ashoka leans over a slab of palm leaf, frowning at a math problem. He's clever, but restless. Not the kind of child to memorize lists of river tributaries for fun. Instead, he listens to the birds, sketches chariots in the margins, and occasionally scrawls terrible little poems when no one is watching. His older brothers are more traditional, more polished, more boring. No one expects Ashoka to become anything more than a provincial governor at best, a spare part in the machinery of empire. But fate and royal families are rarely predictable. Historians still debate whether Ashoka's early exile to the frontier city of Ujjain was punishment or training. He was sent there as a teenager, away from the capital at Pataliputra, far from court politics, far from his father's eye, but not far from ambition. Ujjain is a wild place then, bustling with trade, full of Greek merchants, astrologers, scribes, monks, and misfits. It is here that young Ashoka begins to see a different kind of empire, one built not just on power, but on ideas and poetry, so much poetry. Sanskrit verses painted on doorframes, love poems etched into clay pots, curses disguised as lullabies, and epics so long they spill across generations like slow-moving rivers. The Battle of Kalinga and the Unwriting of Empire. The road to Kalinga is long, dusty, and loud with the sound of marching feet. Years have passed. The quiet poet prince is now Emperor Ashoka, wrapped not in silk but in armor. His poems lie buried beneath campaigns, logistics, proclamations. His hands, once ink-stained, now carry the weight of conquest.
The empire stretches wide, an elephant-shaped sprawl across the Indian subcontinent, and yet there is one independent region that refuses to kneel: Kalinga, a coastal kingdom along the Bay of Bengal. Ashoka, now hardened by years of rule, sees this as a blemish on his map. Poet might have called it a freckle. A strategist calls it an offense. So the campaign begins. You ride alongside his army, not on a horse but in thought. You hear the snorts of war elephants, the creak of wooden wheels, the barked orders. It's all too loud, too fast.
Tout impoétique.
Kalinga resists, fiercely. What happens next is not uncommon by the standards of ancient warfare. But something fractures in Ashoka. After the battle, as victory is declared and flags are raised, he walks alone through the smoldering remains of a town, and stops. There, sitting in the ruins of what might have once been a school or temple, is a child holding the hand of someone who is no longer alive.
No tears.
Just stillness. Ashoka stares. The breath catches in his throat like an unspoken line. Later, when asked about his turning point, he will not mention numbers or treaties. He will simply say, "What have I done?" Historians still debate whether the death toll at Kalinga was truly 100,000 or more, but all agree. This battle changed him. What's remarkable is not the war. History is full of those. What's remarkable is that Ashoka stopped. He turned back from the edge of power and did something very few emperors ever do. He apologized. Publicly, he renounced violence, declared that true conquest is of the heart, that the empire he now wished, pillars in the earth and poems in stone. The next morning, you find yourself walking along a dusty path that winds through the countryside, not bustling with armies this time, but with birdsong, murmuring leaves, and a strange sense of calm. Then you see it, tall, smooth, gleaming faintly in the sun like a finger pointing toward silence. A stone pillar, and carved into its surface, in precise, curving script, is a message, not of war or tribute, but of peace, kindness, and restraint. This is not an edict for soldiers. It is not a proclamation of taxes or borders. It is almost a poem, one of many scattered across the vast stretches of Ashoka's empire. These Ashokan pillars are both architectural marvels and moral monuments. He ordered them raised in towns, at crossroads, near temples, not to intimidate but to inspire. It is hard to do good, one inscription reads, but harder still to understand what good truly means. You run your fingers along the edge of the script, where a mason's hand once lingered, maybe hesitating over a syllable, maybe smiling at the shape of a well-carved word. The script is Brahmi, one of the earliest written forms in India. A script that, thanks to these pillars, survives. Ashoka's words stretch across language too, some in Greek, some in Aramaic, left near border regions where travelers might read them and carry them like folded verses in their minds. These aren't laws, they're reflections. All beings love life, says another, and should not be harmed. It's a sentiment more likely to come from a monk than a monarch. Historians still debate whether Ashoka wrote the inscriptions himself or dictated them to scribes. Either way, the tone is unmistakable. Not preachy, not lofty, just gently human. He speaks of mercy even toward prisoners, of tolerance even toward other religions, of self-restraint even when provoked. You sit at the base of the pillar. The stone is warm. The earth smells faintly of sandalwood and dust.
Of mango groves, monks, and morning conversations. You rise early today. The palace is quiet, save for the rustle of birds shifting in the banyan trees and the soft splash of someone washing rice down in the kitchens. But you don't stay indoors. You follow a path through dew-drenched grass to a quiet grove of mango trees, where morning light filters in like spilled ghee across a golden plate. Here Ashoka often walks, not with guards, not with advisors, but with monks. The grove is humble.
No marble columns. No carved lions.
Just a few flat stones to sit upon and a kettle bubbling gently beside a low fire. Ashoka arrives wrapped in simple robes, not emperor's silk, but white cotton, unadorned. He greets each monk with a gentle nod, then sits, palms resting loosely on his knees, as if holding something invisible. Perhaps a thought, perhaps a regret. The conversation that follows is quiet and curious. Not sermons, not policy, just questions. What is kindness when no one is watching? Ashoka asks one monk. The monk replies, like the mango that ripens where no hand can reach, it still sweetens. They speak of dharma not as law but as a way of being, a daily practice, less about belief and more about effort. Ashoka listens. Sometimes he scribbles notes. Other times, he just breathes and watches the way the breeze moves the mango blossoms. This is not the man who once raised cities. This is the man who now plants shade trees along roads, digs wells for travelers, and builds hospitals for animals. A detail you nearly miss. Yes, animal hospitals. He even issues edicts instructing palace chefs to reduce meat served in the royal kitchens. Compassion in his world becomes policy. Historians still debate how far these reforms extended beyond the urban elite. But the tone was unmistakable. The emperor wanted the state to model gentleness. You sip the monk's tea earthy, a little bitter, but comforting. And as the sun climbs higher, so does the feeling that something rare is happening here. An empire is learning to slow down, to breathe, to write instead of wound. And Ashoka, the unlikely poet king, keeps asking questions, even when the answers arrive in silence. Letters to the world, and the emperor's invisible pen. Midday in the capital is not loud, it's measured. Unlike the clamor of most royal cities, here in Ashoka's Pataliputra, the noise is softened by trees, cloisters, and something else less tangible, intention. You find yourself in the scriptorium today. Not a dusty archive, but a well-lit hall lined with scrolls, tablets, and the constant rustle of parchment being touched, edited, considered. This is where the empire's words are crafted, not just its policies, but its personality. And over in the far corner sits Ashoka, not surrounded by guards, not barking orders, just seated beside a scholar, gently discussing the placement of a phrase in a letter destined for Syria. Yes, Syria, because Ashoka's messages didn't stop at the empire's borders. He sent letters to foreign kings, written on bark, silk, or parchment. Some to Greek rulers like Antiochus II, others to Egyptian pharaohs. The contents? Not demands, not ultimatums, but reflections. May they follow the path of righteousness, one reads. May they see the value of mercy. Historians still debate how these letters were received, or even if they were, but they were written. That much we know. And their tone wasn't condescending. They read like open invitations from one thinking mind to another. You imagine a Greek diplomat, somewhere near the Mediterranean, opening this letter from the east and blinking in confusion. Did the emperor just wish me personal peace? Ashoka wasn't promoting Buddhism like a salesman. He was sharing it, like a poem passed across the fire, not because he had to, but because he thought it might help. He even sent missionaries abroad, not as colonizers, but as soft-footed messengers. His own son, Mahinda, traveled to Sri Lanka, where he helped spread the Dharma, again not by sword, but by story. This is diplomacy by compassion, a foreign policy of footnotes and folded scrolls. You pause beside a young scribe etching a version of Ashoka's teachings onto palm leaf. His script is beautiful, slow, looping, full of care. He looks up at you, eyes tired but proud. No one remembers the voice, he says, but they remember the words. And here, in this quiet room, with ink drying under sunlight and sparrows nesting in the rafters, it feels like those words might last longer than any wall or monument ever could. The Empire of Silence. Evening now. The city of Pataliputra glows faintly in the golden haze of the setting sun, and everything slows. Merchants pack up their wares with yawns. Temple bells toll gently, more like suggestions than summons. And you walk quietly alongside Ashoka, who, for all his titles, moves through the world with surprising stillness. He does not command the space like a conqueror. He observes it like a gardener. Today he is headed to the monastery, not for ceremony, but for silence. Not a public audience, not a grand procession, just a few monks gathered beneath an ancient fig tree, breathing together, sitting, saying almost nothing. You're invited to join. No one says where to sit. There are no instructions. You simply follow Ashoka's lead, folding your legs beneath you, placing your hands palm up, and letting your spine stretch gently toward the night sky. What happens next is not exciting. There is no revelation, just stillness. Crickets begin to chirp. A small wind stirs the leaves, and you become aware of your own heartbeat, your own breath. It's not unlike listening to a poem read very, very slowly. Ashoka doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His presence says more now than his proclamations ever did. This, perhaps, is his final empire, the empire of restraint. A space governed not by walls, but by awareness. He once ruled 1,000,000 souls. Now he honors one breath at a time. And curiously, this too spreads. From court to countryside, the rhythm of life in the Mauryan Empire begins to reflect Ashoka's shift. You hear stories of villagers planting trees for shade, of governors reducing punishments, of sculptors adding tiny animals, foxes, geese, turtles to stone pillars, not for religion, but for beauty. Historians still debate how deeply these reforms impacted ordinary life. Were they symbolic, idealistic, selective? Perhaps, but they were also intentional. Ashoka knew the world couldn't be perfect, but maybe, just maybe, it could be made slightly less cruel. As you sit beneath the tree, eyes closed, the silence begins to hum. Not emptiness, not boredom, but peace in its oldest, softest form. No crown needed, no army marching, just a man listening, and the world quietly listening back. When stone lions learn to smile, you begin your morning today at the edge of a workshop. Not a palace or a temple, but a wide, dusty courtyard filled with chisels, stone dust, and the soft clinking of tools. Here, artisans are carving lions. Not fierce, snarling lions meant to frighten enemies, but poised, dignified lions. Calm mouths, wide, intelligent eyes. You'd almost call their expressions gentle. At the center of this scene stands the sculpture that would become one of the most famous in Indian history. The lion capital of Ashoka, destined for the top of a grand pillar in Sarnath, the place where the Buddha gave his first sermon. It doesn't roar. It doesn't growl. It seems to observe the world with both strength and stillness. You run your fingers across its half-finished surface. The stone is cool, smooth where polished, and rough where work is still underway. Beside it, other figures are taking shape. An elephant, a horse, a bull, a lion, each facing outward, standing for different directions, different paths. All creatures under one moral sky. Ashoka didn't just build statues. He built symbols. And he wasn't trying to impress the gods. He was speaking to people. Common travelers, couriers, pilgrims, even the curious child trailing his mother along the road. His symbols were meant to say, "You matter. You're seen. Be kind, even when no one is watching." Historians still debate whether Ashoka commissioned these designs directly or left them to local craftsmen. But their messaging is clear: power, yes, but restrained. Authority, yes, but tempered by compassion. Even the lotus base of the lion capital is meaningful. Purity rising from mud. The Buddhist metaphor come to life in stone. One artisan nearby wipes his brow and looks at his half-chiseled wheel, the Dharma chakra, the wheel of law. He says, almost to himself, if truth has a shape, maybe it looks like this. You smile, because centuries from now, that very image, the lion, the wheel, will become the national emblem of India. Long after Ashoka's name fades from textbooks, his symbols will endure, not because they demand obedience, but because they invite reflection. You sit for a moment beside the quiet lions, your own breath slowing to match theirs, imaginary as that may be, and for a flicker of a second you swear, they're smiling at you, the emperor who missed his own fame. It is twilight again. This time you're seated in the imperial archives, though archives might be too grand a word. It's more like a series of open-air rooms where clay tablets dry, scrolls are sorted, and messengers bring news from far corners of the empire tied with cords dyed in different colors. Ashoka isn't here. He rarely visits this place anymore. But what you notice, what no one in his lifetime could have known, is just how easily he might have been forgotten. You leaf through one such record, grain inventories from Magadha, troop reports from the Northwest, weather notations from the Deccan. Ashoka's name appears only occasionally, sometimes not at all, as if the empire itself began to move under its own quiet momentum. You ask a scribe, a cheerful man with ink-stained fingers, how the emperor is remembered. He blinks, shrugs. A fair ruler, the thoughtful one. Bit strange about the tree planting. That's it. For all the pillars and edicts, Ashoka never commissioned a grand monument to himself. No golden tomb, no sprawling sculpture park, no court poet tasked with preserving his glory. He might be the only ancient emperor who didn't seem particularly interested in being remembered. Historians still debate why his memory faded for centuries after his death. Some blame political shifts, others the rise of new dynasties. Still others think he was simply too quiet for the storytellers. And yet his words remained, not in stories passed down by royal bards, but in stone, half buried in riverbanks and forests. In inscriptions no one could read for 1,000 years. It wasn't until the 19th century that British archaeologists began to realize these strange old pillars, scattered across India, were all saying the same thing. Ashoka had been speaking. The world just wasn't listening yet. You sit with that thought for a while. Imagine writing your heart onto rock, knowing full well no one may understand it in your lifetime. Ashoka's kind of fame, it turns out, had a longer fuse, but it burns softer, like the ember of a lamp meant not to dazzle, but to comfort a traveler in the dark. The royal gardens and the sound of no applause. By now, you know the rhythm. The empire doesn't roar, it hums. It doesn't lurch forward, it breathes. And nowhere is that more evident than in the royal gardens. A place where Ashoka, once a prince of ambition, now spends his afternoons not in command, but in observation. The gardens are not ornamental in the European sense. No maze hedges, no marble fountains shaped like gods flexing muscles. Instead, these gardens feel like someone whispered a landscape into existence. Paths that curve instead of cut, ponds where turtles sun themselves, and rows of medicinal herbs tucked gently between fruit trees. Ashoka walks here without ceremony. No trumpets, no honor guards, just a small basket slung over one arm, gathering things. A curious pod, a particularly fragrant flower, a stone that reminds him of a story he once heard. He's often joined by children, not princes or heirs, but the offspring of gardeners, monks, traders. They follow him like small ducks. He listens to them speak about clouds, frogs, and occasionally dreams of flying. He nods as if they are philosophers. You watch him sit beneath a neem tree, sharing pomegranate seeds with a child who insists that ants have opinions. He doesn't correct her. The moment is unremarkable in scale, but perfect in weight. No scribes are here to record it. No statues will be built to mark it. No applause. Just life lived quietly. Historians still debate whether Ashoka truly renounced all luxury or merely curated a softer kind. But they agree he did not return to war. And for a ruler in the ancient world, that might be the rarest act of all. He would rather tend to gardens than grudges. You lie down in the grass and let the sounds of bees and slow footsteps lull your mind. The sky above turns from saffron to lavender, and the laughter of children rises and falls like distant bells. If empires are remembered for their battles, Ashoka's may be the only one remembered for its pause. The princess who refused to be royal. This morning begins not with Ashoka, but with Sanghamitta, his daughter. You find her seated beneath a Bodhi tree, its heart-shaped leaves flickering like whispers above her. She's dressed not in silks, but in the plain robes of a Buddhist nun, a choice that sent ripples through the court once upon a time. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was unexpected. Daughters of emperors are meant to be pawns, married off like well-wrapped gifts to ensure alliances. But Sanghamitta refused the ribbon. She chose the robe instead. Ashoka, to his credit, didn't argue. In fact, he eventually entrusted her with one of the most sacred missions of his reign, to carry a branch of the original Bodhi tree to Sri Lanka. Yes, an actual tree branch. Not a metaphor, not a scroll, a branch, carried across the sea with the tenderness of a newborn and the weight of an idea. A sliver of the tree beneath which the Buddha attained enlightenment, now to be planted in foreign soil. Sanghamitta didn't go alone. She led a small entourage of monks and lay people, braving storms, suspicion, and seasickness. And upon arrival in Sri Lanka, she did something extraordinary. She planted the tree, and it grew. Historians still debate whether the tree that stands in Anuradhapura today is truly the same one Sanghamitta brought. But even skeptics admit its symbolic roots run just as deep. It wasn't just a botanical gesture. It was a cultural bridge. And for the people of Sri Lanka, Sanghamitta became more than a visitor. She became a founder. You return to her side now, beneath that same Bodhi tree in India. She's older, serene. She speaks little, but her silence holds the weight of oceans crossed and futures shaped. Sometimes the most lasting legacies aren't carved in stone. They're planted, of elephants, regret, and the strange shape of remorse. The day is warm and slow. Even the river nearby seems to yawn as it bends through the fields. Ashoka sits by the water, watching a small herd of elephants across the bank. Their movement is lumbering but graceful, like dancers who forgot the choreography but decided to improvise anyway. He watches them for a long time, and then he speaks, not to you, not to anyone in particular, but into the air. I once killed 100 elephants in a single day. The sentence lands heavy, like a stone dropped in still water. You wait, unsure if he's speaking figuratively. He's not. The war at Kalinga, you've heard of it by now, wasn't just brutal. It was cataclysmic. The rivers ran dark. Cities burned. And elephants, used in battle as ancient tanks, fell by the hundreds. That moment, standing among the bodies, changed him. He didn't cry. He didn't kneel. But something in him turned. Ashoka has never been fully able to explain why that battle broke him, when others hadn't. Historians still debate whether the transformation was sudden or gradual, whether the remorse was spiritual or simply exhaustion. But today he doesn't analyze it. He just watches the elephants and names them in his mind. Soft names, silly ones. You sit beside him as he scribbles something into a worn palm leaf notebook. To conquer oneself is greater than to conquer 1,000 in battle. The line feels lived in. Later that week, Ashoka issues another edict. This one bans certain kinds of animal sacrifices in public ceremonies. Not because he's trying to erase traditions, but because he can no longer stomach waste disguised as reverence. He's not perfect. He still eats, rules, commands. But he's trying. And in a world that praises decisive victory, Ashoka begins to champion uncertain healing. The elephants trumpet in the distance, and Ashoka bows his head. Not in prayer, but in apology. You wonder how many emperors have ever meant it. The edict on the rock that no one could read. This afternoon, you walk with Ashoka along a dusty road flanked by tamarind trees. The air smells faintly of clay and sun-warmed grain. Farmers wave as he passes. No one bows too deeply anymore. That's how he prefers it now, respect without fear. You eventually arrive at something most people walk past without noticing. A large, rounded rock, half buried in the earth, sun-bleached and stubborn. But carved into it, faint yet deliberate, are lines of script. Ashoka places a hand on it like greeting an old friend. This one took them 6 weeks to finish, he murmurs. You peer at the lines. The script is Brahmi, the language of the people, not Sanskrit, not high court dialect. These are messages meant for everyone. And what do they say? They talk about mercy, about kindness to animals, about caring for your parents, about building wells along trade routes. They talk about the good behavior of officials and the importance of listening before punishing. One line even encourages visiting your neighbors without being annoying. Practical, grounded, decidedly human. Ashoka's edicts weren't divine revelations. They were public service announcements, carved into rock and posted like ancient bulletin boards. You imagine the ancient equivalent of, "Be good to your buffalo. Drink clean water. Don't yell at monks." But here's the twist. Within a few centuries, no one could read them anymore. The Brahmi script faded from common use. The meaning was lost. For over 1,000 years, people stood beside these stones and saw only strange scratches. Travelers wrote about them. Scholars guessed. Some thought they were magical. Others thought they were leftovers from a vanished god. It wasn't until 1837 that a man named James Prinsep finally cracked the Brahmi code, deciphering the script that brought Ashoka's voice back from the dust. Historians still debate whether Ashoka expected his words to outlive him. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe what mattered was carving the intention, the care, the conscience into something solid, whether or not anyone ever read it again. And now here you are, standing beside this quiet stone, and you can finally hear it. Live simply, rule gently, regret deeply, begin again. The pillar in the forest that outlived the war. The sun is low as you step into the clearing. A soft hush blankets the space, like even the birds have paused to look. And in the center, tall, weathered, but unbowed, stands one of Ashoka's pillars. Not just a marker, not just architecture, a message. It rises nearly 40 feet into the warm air, its surface smooth and golden-hued from centuries of sun. At the top, the capital is simple, no snarling lions here, just a sense of elegant balance. You trail your fingers along its base, where the inscription begins in a steady, looping hand. Still legible, still waiting. This one, Ashoka had placed on the road between two cities that had once gone to war. Quiet place. On purpose. He wanted travelers to pass it, pause, and think. The message? May there be no conflict born of misunderstanding.
No threats. No decrees.
Just suggestion, like a sigh carved into stone. And it worked. For a time, the violence between those two regions slowed. Trade resumed. Pilgrims passed freely. And for a brief few decades, peace seemed contagious. Of course, the empire would not last forever. It never does. But this pillar? Still here. Historians still debate how many of these pillars Ashoka actually saw completed. Some were razed posthumously. Some were lost to floods or stolen for other projects. But the ones that remain, like this one, are quiet testaments to something rarely preserved in history.
Intention.
Not glory, not conquest, just the honest effort to be better, to nudge a violent world toward gentleness. You sit in the grass beside it, the stone warm at your back, and you let the wind tell the rest of the story. Says nothing, of course, but it says it kindly. The emperor's sleep, and the wind that remembers. You find him in the garden again. Older now, the lines on his face are no longer from frowning, but from smiling slowly. His hair is silver, his sandals are worn, and beside him, a bowl of cut mangoes he offers to you without a word. Ashoka doesn't talk as much these days, but when he does, it's about seeds. It's all seeds, he murmurs. You plant kindness. You may never see the tree. Still plant. Today he naps more than he rules. His advisors run the court. His scribes carry on the work of translation. His pillars no longer require his inspection. But the empire is quieter. In a good way. You walk with him one last time beneath the flowering trees. The branches above shift with a breeze that carries no decree, no message, just peace. It's easy to forget how the story began. With ambition, with blood, with war elephants and battlefield smoke. But here, at the edge of it all, there is rest. You ask if he regrets it all. The early years, the harshness, the victories won too easily. He doesn't answer at first. Then, regret is a fire, but it can warm you if you don't feed it too much. A gentle truth. He spends his last seasons near a monastery, not a palace. He writes very little now, but sometimes, monks find scraps of notes tucked between pages of old scrolls. Sentences like, "Even a pebble in the river has purpose. When unsure, offer tea. Be a soft place for others to land." Historians still debate what finally caused his death. Illness? Age? Quiet contentment? But they agree on this. Ashoka died not as a king, but as a person. And somewhere a Bodhi tree rustles. A stone pillar catches moonlight. A lion smiles from its pedestal. And a branch, carried across the sea by a daughter with a calm voice, still flowers in another land. Now you lie back. The story has come to rest, but the sounds remain. Rustling leaves, distant bells, the hush of footsteps on stone. All the noise of an empire slowed to a breath. You might picture a warm breeze curling over a stone pillar, or a carved lion blinking sleepily in the dawn, or an emperor setting down his crown with a sigh, pouring tea into chipped cups. It's all still there. You don't need to remember every edict, every road, every soft rebellion written in ink and patience. Let it wash over you like a low tide. Ashoka's legacy was not built to dazzle. It was meant to endure gently, like smooth stones underfoot, guiding the path without insisting you walk it. So as you drift now, wherever you are, however your day has looked, let your thoughts settle like silt in a river. Let your breath find the rhythm of old monks walking in circles. Let your heart unclench just a little. Maybe you've carried too much today. Maybe the world has asked you to be sharper than you wanted to be. But here, in this quiet, ancient corner of memory, you are allowed to simply be. Soft, unfinished, growing. Just like Ashoka, the emperor who planted regret and harvested peace. Sleep well. The wind remembers for you.